Hey, welcome to another episode of Open Mic. My name is Jared, and I'm excited that you are with us today. Hey, this is our third part in a series that we're doing following our Catching Feelings Relationships series. So it drops the Thursday after. So if you haven't listened, go back and listen to our relationship series and the podcasts that have come before this one. But this is a podcast where we get to sit and talk about all things relationships, all things today, singleness. So today I'm sitting with Jack, with D-Chan, and with Coco. And I just want to start off, we're going to start off quick today, okay? What makes singleness seem so hard in the church?
Yeah, I think sometimes singleness can be seen as really hard because we value family so much, which we should for sure, and marriage. But, we were talking before, and sometimes it does feel like we put marriage on like this pedestal of like, man, you're on the A team if you're married, you are awesome. And if you're single, you're still on the JV squad, right? You're not quite there in the grand scheme of things. And I think there can be some like just some false pretenses associated with that. And I think as single people in the church, they have a spot just as much as people who are married, who have families. So yeah, I think that could be definitely like a misconception of singleness.
Yeah, I think just as much as what Logan said before, I think in one of his messages, is that that singleness feels like a lower standard, or like marriage is the big leagues. And you think about like Ephesians 5, it does have like it says that husbands should love their wives as Christ loves the church. So it is like a picture or an example of the gospel, but it's not the example of it's not the only example of the gospel. D-Chan, maybe what are some other things that make it so it's taboo to like be single in the church?
Well, I think one thing that makes it just weird in the church is within, I think, a Christian culture, we idolize singleness to a point where it can become like our identity of like, man, if I am not single, I am lesser. And what happens is we start going this comparison game of like, well, maybe that person is better than I am. Maybe I am more broken than that person. So that is why God has not provided someone for us. But the reality is, I think God is just allowing us this time to grow. Because I think statistically out there, it is 70-80%. By the time you're 30, 35, you'll most likely be married. So if that percentage is true and statistics are correct, it means everyone right now will at least have that amount of time to grow closer to God. Because I think singleness, we see it in Scripture. In 1 Corinthians 7, Paul is talking to the married and the unmarried couple, saying if you're married, that's great, but if you're not married right now, that is also such a gift. It's neither a better or worse. It is both equal. Singleness and marriage are both equal and good gifts. And I think with that singleness, God is allowing us time to really grow spiritually and intimately with Him. Because realistically, I think Jack and Jared, you guys can speak to this, is when you're married, you don't have as much time as you like to think you do because you have another spouse to look after.
Yeah, for sure. I'm also going to piggyback off of your question, Jared. I think ever since like the world has just begun, it's always been engraved in our heads like the next stage of life. And we're always like, even whenever you're kids, like, oh, do you have a crush on someone in school? And so I think that's just like the world in general. We're constantly like, when you go home from Christmas break, your family is like, hey, do you like someone? Do you have like someone special in your life? Is like your grandma's tagline. And so I think it's constantly like in our brains, just like we need to be looking for someone. And I think it's like such a sweet season to just like sit and just like be with your girlfriends, be with your guy friends, like, and just enjoy singleness. But it is hard because it's a desire that like a lot of us have, is to be married to somebody. And it's not a bad thing. It's a great thing. But especially in the church world, I even think sometimes you're getting involved in your church, you're like scoping out who the people are, and you're like, oh, they're kind of cute, but then you're like nervous because you're like, oh, well, they're my friend. Like, I don't know if they would say yes to a date with me. Is it awkward if we go on a date and like then we just decide we want to be friends? Like, is that going to like change our relationship? I think that's hard because sometimes like it depends on how big your young adult, or like even, well, you could even say youth group, like is in your church. Like sometimes it's smaller, sometimes it's bigger. And you're like, I don't know if anyone's here for me. But so I think that can be hard because you're like, I don't know if anyone's here for me. So maybe God just doesn't want me to date anybody. And you're like, no, God can literally bring you someone from literally the opposite end of the world.
Yeah, that something we were talking about beforehand was sometimes it's a delayed. You don't think like you haven't found someone yet, so it's like something must be up. Something must be. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that I've heard is like you should have standards, or you should not just settle. Can you guys speak to that a little bit? Of just if marriage is the end goal, then you will settle for really anyone, and that's not ideal. Can you guys speak to like setting and knowing your standards so that when someone comes along, you know if that fits or that reaches or not?
Yeah, I can speak to that. I've been like in really great relationships and really like awesome guys that I've met. And even just like guy friendships that I've been able to have that I really like honor and respect and I really look up to. And I think that your whole life, you know, like your dad is an example, or maybe it's your brother, maybe it's like one of your best guy friends, like those are, or maybe it's your pastor, like all these people, or maybe it's vice versa, like maybe like the pastor's wife is like, you really admire these things about her. So all the people in your life are going to influence you like, oh, I really love that characteristic about them. And I've been married for a little over 6-7 months now. And I remember whenever I was single before I met Ryan, my husband, I wrote down a list of things that I wanted in a future husband. Literally, like, not knowing, like, God, I didn't even know Ryan at the time whenever I made this list. And so it's really cool because I made a list of things that I'm like, I'm just going to shoot my shot. Like, it's going to be the, like, you know, the biggest things that I want to, like, even just the little small details that I would want in a future husband. And I had no idea that, like, God would put, like, literally have already created a human. And Ryan does check off, like, a lot of those boxes. Like, I prayed for someone tall. Ryan's, like, 2 inches, like, taller than me. And you know what? God still answered that. But I really do believe, like, don't lower your standards. And, like, it's okay to, like, ask God for big things. Don't be surprised if, like, you meet your future spouse someday and, like, they don't have they don't need to check every single box. I wouldn't say, like, don't settle, don't lower your standards, but, like, it's okay to ask God to, like, bring these, like, big characteristics that you want in a future husband or a future wife. Like, those are good things to ask for. And, like, God knows you. God literally, like, created you. And I do believe, like, God is going to bring someone alongside of you that, like, really, like, fits you well. You might, like, butt heads with them a little bit because, like, me and Ryan are so different from each other, but he really does bring out, like, the best side of me and, like, knows how to love me well, better than I can, like, love myself sometimes. And so I would say, like, don't settle. I'm glad, like, that I didn't, because Ryan, like, I'm so thankful that I have Ryan, and God answered, like, so many of my wishes in it.
Yeah, Jack, I think that's so good that you said to, like, write down a list of things, because I think it is good to know what you're looking for and to have a list of, like, non-negotiables. For me, some of those are, I want him to be a believer, right? I want him to be passionate about the Lord and the local church and serving in the church. And so I think those are big things. And then there's things that you're like, oh, I would prefer him to be funny, or, you know, like some things that you're like, those are non-negotiables that maybe God's going to bring someone that you didn't expect. But I love that when a pastor says, don't lower your standards, lengthen your patience. And I totally get that. I've had to do that, and I have to remind myself to do that often of, like, okay, God, like, I would love to be married. I am single, but I'm going to trust your timing and your plan and your purpose. And I truly believe, like, up to this point in my life, like, I have not been supposed to be married. Does that make sense? Like, it's God's mercy and grace in my life for me not to be married at this moment, because the Bible talks about how God does not withhold good things from those who love him. And sometimes I can think of marriage as a good thing, which it is, but I think of that's the good thing for me right now. And God's like, actually, this is a mercy for me to not be giving this to you at this moment, because he has things for me to do that I couldn't do while I'm married at this moment, or he's like, hey, no, I have someone really awesome for you, which Lord willing, that's the case. But it just like you need to wait a little bit longer. And I really do think like in this time of waiting, it is very special, and it does give me more time to be fully devoted and to pursue God like never before, to serve him like never before, because I have more time. And so I think it's just like, it's one of those things where we have to make a choice to like be patient, and we have to make, and I'm not like literally, I can sit here and do this podcast, and in 10 minutes I can be like, all right, Lord, if you'll just bring that man right now, like literally that's how it is. And when I talk to some of my girlfriends, I'm like, we kind of go through these like ebb and flows of like, we're good, or wow, this is hard. And I think just like trusting God with it and bringing those emotions and those feelings to him and letting community in on that is so helpful, because then you're like, oh, I'm not the only one. I'm not the only one. Okay.
Yeah, I think, Coco, I have a question. So you're talking about waiting right now, and this could relate to a lot of our audience. We are all in a waiting period, and specifically for this podcast, in this period of singleness. I think in Scripture we see that what we should look for is to be equally yoked with another believer, and I think what that looked like for me was with my fiance Carolyn. Is one thing that drew me to her was her beauty, outward beauty. But as I grow each day and to learn about her, what my heart grows for is her character. So I think my question to this table, and also you, Coco, is just like, what are some characteristics that people should be looking for right now within their potential significant other?
I would say, I mean, there's a book called Mingling of Souls.
Sure.
It's by Matt Chandler. It's basically a commentary through Song of Solomon, which I grew up in church, and Song of Solomon was a book I just didn't know how to read, I'll be honest, because it's a poetic book, but it provides probably some of the best dating and relationship advice that I've seen out there. And one of the first things that he notes in it is the first part of the book of Song of Solomon is about why he's attracted to the female counterpart in Song of Solomon. And some of the things they talk about are like their character. They talk about their love for the Lord. They talk about the way that they serve the people around them. And one of the things that's really interesting that this is kind of hopping off, but I'll hop back on at some point. One of the things that Song of Solomon talks about, at some point it talks about how when they're getting married, the character in Song of Solomon had like, I think it's like 80 mighty men with him that were basically like his groomsmen, his guys that were like his people.
That's a big
like,
wedding party.
Yeah, it has a big old wedding party. But it speaks to like the strength of community, that like their relationship wasn't just happening like out in isolation. It was happening like people knew him that weren't just his significant other. And I think the role of community in like, whether it's a relationship or singleness, Jack, when you're talking about making a list, I think if you struggle with like lowering your standards, making a list and showing that to someone that has the license to call you out is one of the best things that you can do. Because if you make a list and you say, man, I want someone who saved, baptized, serving, loves the Lord, is in a community group, is in a small group, and kind of make some checklists, and then you start going after some guy who's not doing those things, man, what a great thing for a friend to come that loves you, can come shoulder tap you and go, hey, I love you. You made this list. Let's look at it. This is what God ordained this list to be, and he's not meeting these standards. Let's hop off. Let's take a break. Let's pump the brakes. And then one of the things he talks about in that book is when you find yourself attracted to things that are not godly, which you might be attracted to them physically, or they might do something for you that you're like, I don't even know why, but like, why are we attracted to that? Like, look at yourself and see what insecurity you have, so that you're like, man, am I just looking forward to marriage? Do they make me feel a certain way? Do they make me feel strong, safe, whatever those things might be that aren't necessarily one of those things that God put on your list or God gave you to be? And then ask yourself, why am I attracted to this? Because that will start to figure out some of those insecurities you have in yourself and will make you who you need to be, regardless of if you're in a relationship. Sorry, go back to D-Chan's question. I'll let somebody else answer after
I think like when you're looking for a spouse, like I'm looking for someone who exemplifies like characteristics of Jesus. So a servant leader, someone who is kind, who's generous. Like, I obviously the basics is for anyone single that's out there. Like, you need to find someone who loves the Lord and is committed to him in every area of their life. And so when they're committed to God in every area of their life, man, all the other things are going to line up. And then there might be some preferences that you're like, oh, I would prefer this over this. And that's okay too. But I think like having the basics, but I just think of like, man, when I'm looking for a man, I'm looking for somebody who is deeply committed to the Lord and that everything else flows out of that. And so, yeah, and there's guys like that out there. We have to remind ourselves. For any ladies listening, you might be like, where are those people, though? Because that you can believe that lie, and that I do believe that's a lie because Satan wants us to have a scarcity mindset of like, that's it, that person that just got engaged, yep, he's the last good one. Like, that can be how it feels in, like, a Christian community. And we have to fight against the lie of, like, actually, no, that's not the last one that God is, like, made awesome. Like, no, he actually has people out there who he has maybe just he's waiting for that person. And so I think that we can just remember that God is the God of abundance and God has good things in store for those who love him. So it could be marriage for some people and it might not be too.
So what are some things, we talked through how marriage is a gift, and Coco, you kind of mentioned this with the having the time to serve right now because of where you're at in life. What are some of, if marriage is a gift, what are some of the good things that come along with that gift?
Ooh. Of marriage?
Of singleness.
Yeah, okay. Man, honestly, I was talking with some, like, my friends and some of my, my close friends, and we were talking about how we are going to actually, like, we have a blast at my house right now. Like, we are always just, like, having fun and having people over and, like, doing fun things like Valentine's Day. Come on. And we were like, man, we just, like, get to literally do whatever we want. And so, like, that honestly is a beautiful thing. And so there's a lot of benefits to being single. I get to do what I want with my time, with my money, with, literally what time I wake up, what time I go to bed. Like, I get to make those decisions. And then whenever you bring someone else into your life, like, you make those decisions together. And so there's a lot of independence that happens when you're single, and that's a good thing. But also, like, I just think of, like, that's going to be so different when we do get married, and it'll be a transition and a joy. But right now, in the meantime, I'm like, man, it's fun, and we get to go do fun things. We get to, I just feel like I get to do a lot of fun things in this season of singleness, which I'm super grateful for. And I think that there is a misconception of, like, you can't be like content and be I guess what's the word I'm looking for? Like, you can be content without wanting marriage. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I think that is a lie, because I'm like, oh, I can be content, but I also can desire marriage at the same time. It's not like it's either one or the other. And so for me, I'm like, God, I pray for that and I desire that, but also, like, help me to be okay where I'm at right now, and help me to, like, look for opportunities to serve and love you and invest my time in other people to maximize this time, because we can maximize this time, or we can not, and then we really, like, the benefit can be so much greater if we are intentional with it.
And that's true of any spot in life.
Yeah.
If you're looking at the next stage, I remember this is always the example I use. I remember when I couldn't drive when I was like 15. I was like, man, when I can drive, everything will get figured out.
Yeah.
And then I could drive, and you know what it meant? I needed a job to pay for the car, gas, insurance. Yep. And then it was like there was this snowball of things, and it was always this, like, whenever I get to the next stage, it'll get better. Whenever I get to the next stage, it'll get better. I don't think God wants us to live that way. I think he wants us to go, I want you to be prepared for that next stage, but not only be satisfied if you get to it.
Yeah. I wanted to read 1 Corinthians 7:32. It says, I want you to be free from the concerns of this life. An unmarried man can spend his time doing the Lord's work and thinking how to please him. And I think that's such a good verse for those that are single. Like, this time that you're single, like, you can, like Coco said, you can do whatever you want whenever you want. Like, you really do have the most freedom and time when you're single. And you can serve the Lord like no other. You can serve others like no other. Obviously, you can do those things in marriage as well. But it might look a little bit differently because you might have kids one day, and then it more swerves to, like, okay, I'm serving my spouse more in different ways. And singleness is just such like a sweet time. Like I would have loved to go to Target a couple more times and do whatever I want, and I still get to go to Target, but I have another person that I'm thinking about, that I'm sharing like my life with. I'm sharing my income with. What's mine is Ryan's. And something that's so like awesome about singleness is like what's yours is yours, and also like it's obviously the Lord's too, but you can use your time, your money, your career literally however you want, and so I think that's such a sweet gift, because some of my favorite years were when I was single, because you just got to do so many fun things. You got to go on so many trips. Like I just remember like all of my college friends, like we would just always go and like, hey, you want to go do this weekend? Like, let's go. And like, whenever you're married and you have kids, like you have other people that like, you can still go do those fun things, but you're taking into account of other people. So, it's just such a fun, sweet season. There's so many like other fun people that you can do life alongside with. And who knows, you might even meet someone like while you're going and doing all those fun things.
Yeah, and I think when you guys listen to this podcast, also don't hear us be like, oh, singleness is easy. We also understand, we
Yes.
empathize, because like it's easy sometimes to talk about singleness as a gift, and when we are on the other side of that coin now. But we also want you to realize we remember those times that when you're single and you're kind of like, man, it's New Year's, or you're hitting a transition phase when your friends are like, getting married or getting engaged, and you're like, well, what do I do? And I think the problem here is that we can feel like we're lacking, but I want to come here as a team and say, we want to encourage you that you are where you're supposed to be. And in this time of singleness, like, don't let that be your identity. Like, I think, like, because God has so much more for you than just, my only identity is that I'm the single person. No, God has provided you this moment to utilize it. And I think the best way, like Coco said, is to get around other believers, get around other girls, other guys, and come together. Because if singleness becomes our identity, we start believing that marriage or a relationship can fix our problems. But the reality is, if you've been in any relationship that's not even like an intimate one, might be a friendship, you understand that in every relationship there requires sacrifice. And I think Hollywood and movies and music has painted this picture that, relationships all sunshine and rainbows. But I think as we continue and grow older and start a relationship, we realize, man, it's supposed to mark what Scripture shows for us, what a true relationship with, and that is self-sacrifice every day. So I just think, like, we just want to encourage you too that we understand and we empathize. So do you guys have any tips on what to do in those moments when people are like, man, I feel like I'm alone? What can someone do for that?
Yeah, I think, my heart goes out to the single girl, especially because, those are people who I minister with, I do life with, who's like, man, maybe I've put myself out there and it's hard and I don't know what else to do. And so my encouragement, like, to all the single ladies out there is like, don't give up hope. Like, if God has put that desire in your heart, like, keep praying and keep believing that God could bring that person, and keep asking him for it. And in the meantime, like, start preparing yourself. Like, what is God working in you? What is he doing in you that you can be like, hey, I need to be more disciplined in this area. I'm going to try to do that. And look for those ways. But also, I think another hard thing is, like, especially teaching, like you said, when like your friends are getting married, I have a lot of like interns and people who I'm like, man, like, they have gone through the program and like they're getting married, and like it's a beautiful thing. But what I have to do is be disciplined in celebrating them. Because if I am like, there goes another one, there it is, okay, that feels great, like, we can be cynical and be in this mindset of like, great, like, it happened for them, not for me. But what I have to do is I have to practice celebrating and combat that, like, man, I'm disappointed that that's not happening with me, to God, you're good, and you have answered their prayers, and you are so gracious to bring that person into their life. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to celebrate them the best I can. I'm going to show up for the bridal shower. I'm going to show up for the wedding, and I'm going to celebrate. And I really do believe that God sees that and that God will honor that. Like, I really do. He's going to help me in those moments where it feels hard to celebrate. But that has been such a, I feel like, a gift for me that I can give that away to somebody in that moment when maybe I'm like yeah, I don't like, I would like to be married as well, but I'm like, no, I'm going to choose to do this. And I really do feel like that is what honors God. And sometimes it's not easy, but I do think for all the single ladies out there listening, like, don't give up hope, keep asking and keep praying that God would do that. But in the meantime, like, surround yourself with good community, because we are made to be in community. We're not made to do life alone. And so although a lot of times we think that's just like a marriage relationship, we can have friendships. We can have, like a life group or a small group together that we can be like, man, we're going to do life together. And that is a beautiful expression of community as well. So don't give up hope. Keep on praying. Keep believing that God can answer those prayers.
Yeah, D-Chan, you said something that made me think it is really hard when you go through transition, or everyone around you goes through transition, and you're the only one who doesn't. It feels extra isolated when everybody feels like everybody else takes 2 steps forward and you're still standing back behind them. It feels like it's a mile behind them. Yeah. And I would just say, like, in transition, it feels like a hard left turn when you're in a car and you're like, I don't have anything. What am I hanging on to? So I would say know what you have to hang on to. Like, hang on to it when things are good, hang on to it and know where it's at when things are bad, and know that, like, I naturally in transition, I get isolated, I get tunnel vision, I look out for myself. I don't always go, okay, this is what I need to do. This is what's healthy for me. This is what God wants me to do. Instead, I have to know and make a plan beforehand, before everything blows up, before the stuff happens. I have to know, like, okay, this is what I'm going to do in this season because I know what my tendencies are. So I think about it all the time when you see somebody that gets engaged and their friends there and you're like, they want to be engaged too. And that's okay that they want to be engaged too. But how can I choose to do what Coco said? Choose to celebrate and have a friend that you can call and say, man, this was hard. Yeah. And have a friend that you can call that can encourage you. Know what your disciplines look like. Know what it looks like to read the Bible and pray and pour your heart out to God when things are good. So when things are bad, you're still right there. You're still close. Yeah. One of my favorite things that anyone's ever said was, when stuff happens in life, you can't go out and buy a 30-year walk with Christ. But when you're walking with him every day and stuff happens, he's not far. You're right there. Yeah. You've been close to him. You've walked with him, and you know what that looks like. So, man, we hope that this has been helpful for you. We hope that if you're single, or if you're even around people that are single, you can encourage and be encouraged, and you can serve God as best you can in the season that you're in right now. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.